Hi, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. I'm your host, Bill DeFilippo, joined tonight by my co-host, Matt Filipovitz. Matt, what's going on?
Bill, I'm good. I'm excited that we have a returning member of our little podcast family back tonight, but I'm mostly excited to see you once again this week.
You don't have to lie like that about either part of that, because the person who is joining us is our dear friend, confidant, brother in podcasting, anything else you want to call him, Matt DeBear. Matt, how much you sleeping lately?
It depends on the night, but not very much.
Those who are unaware, Matt became the second father in the Roar Lions Roar family after our own Craig Fritz. Matt has his daughter Atherton Pugh DeBear is a lovely future Nittany Lion who is not going to Michigan State. Is that right, Matt?
That is the plan. And then I saw tuition costs in state and out of state. So that is currently in flux for my currently 2-month-old daughter. 2 months old today, actually, as we're recording this.
In the immortal words of a lot of people, there's a lot of ball game left. But we will do all we will keep you updated over the next 18 some odd years over Matt's daughter's college decision here on the podcast. But
Recruiting's getting out of hand.
Just a little bit. James Franklin, what are you doing, my man? Speaking of James Franklin, we're, in kind of the doldrums of the off season. It's a little slow. There's not too terribly much going on. All these sorts of things.
As long as you're not in Evanston.
As long as, yeah.
Yeah, I was waiting for it.
I wasn't going to say anything. But yes, a lot going on in Evanston. We're not going to touch that. Instead, what we're going to do is we want to do a little bit of a game. It's not quite a game. It's kind of a retrospective on James Franklin's time as the head coach of the Penn State Nittany Lions. He's entering his 10th season in Happy Valley. After what happened in Evanston, he's the second longest tenured head coach in the Big Ten. It's very possible that, depending on what happens with this Iowa season, that at the end of the year, James Franklin going into year 11 at Penn State after this year is the longest tenured head coach in Big Ten football, which is a pretty crazy, wild thing to think about, considering what Franklin's, I would say, his reputation coming to Penn State was, and the number of times people thought he was going to leave for other jobs. So what we wanted to do on today's episode of the podcast is, one, deal with the fly that is flying around my head. I apologize for that for the YouTube viewers. But two, talk about the 10 most important, the 10 most defining, however you lay it out, games of the James Franklin era at Penn State. And the way it's going to work, I put together a list where I'm doing 1 through 5, 6 through 10. My list of these games, because I was the one who came up with this idea when we were trying to scramble to come up with a podcast idea. After we go through my list, the two Matts are going to give any other games that might not have been on my list. And we're going to talk about what we remember about them, why they were so important, what we felt at the time and what we feel now as we look back on the games. And for me, when I was putting together this list, it was tough. Matt DeBear is going to start with, he's going to be the person I go to with the first game. So we'll just take a minute here and start with you, Matt Flip, about when you were looking back on these games and you were looking back through a decade of James Franklin football at Penn State. Were you kind of surprised, like I was, at how much cutting down on this list that you needed to do? Or did you have a pretty good idea after doing one scan through, all right, here are the 10 games in chronological order?
It was a bit of both. And I think a lot of that is because I went to Penn State at a very unique time. My first season as a Penn State student was 2015. So an awful season. So I got to experience like the real down bad years of Penn State my first year. And obviously I grew up in a Penn State family. I've been a fan my whole life. But then I got this like insane shot in the arm of my sophomore year being 2016. So then I had this insane high that we're kind of still in the middle of. So it was a bit hard for me to decide, like, of the high games, where they ranked. But in terms of, like, things that made the cut, there's, like, very few from those first, 2 years of the Franklin era, just because I really don't think there was anything that memorable from that. And there's also, the natural bias of like, I was a student. I remember being either in the press box when I was with the blog or in the student section for a lot of these games.
Yeah, and Matt, kind of the same question to you. When you ended up sitting down and looking through this list of games, did you have a hard time cutting down a list, or did you have a pretty good idea of like, these are the 10 games, maybe 12 games, and I have to trim it a little bit, of games that were important to finding however you wanted to answer this question?
I started out, I think I had 16 games when I first listed this out, and that was just wins. And then I went back through, and I think I had another half dozen or so losses. And a lot of that was, what is a defining game to me? And like Matt said, this has been such a unique tenure in terms of how James Franklin started, the sanctions, the roster situation, the situation he walked into versus where we are now. Entering his 10th season, it's just there's such a huge swath of, obviously a huge number of games to choose from, but also the situation and the expectations and everything that kind of goes into a defining game has changed so much over the 9 seasons that we had to go through here, that was the challenge, was I think trying to, figure out what was a defining game, why is it a defining game, and then kind of weeding it out from there. I did get down to 10. I will say I ultimately got down to 10. And I'm pretty confident with the list. One thing I will say, or I'll as we get further into this, I had a hard time with the first couple of years trying to figure out what is a defining game, because that was such a unique situation with a roster that was gutted, was from a depth chart standpoint, was just all over the place.
So 2015 Army's not on your list?
I'm sorry?
I will be honest. I have a list of honorable mentions. That is actually an honorable mention.
Oh my God.
And I
had some 2015 games kind of under consideration because that was such a kind of transitional year. We had Saquon. We kind of started to see glimpses of what became the 16 and 17 teams in that season. So, are those defining games in a sense? So we'll get into it a little bit more, and you'll kind of see how I've all settled out for me.
Yes, I have 3 2015 games, and Penn State lost 2 of them and almost lost as honorable mentions, as games that were significant for, aren't in this list, but were significant. 2 losses and 1 game that felt like a loss, which is the Army game. But for me, this is the one game on my list that the 2 Matts know about, and the number 1 game, and we're doing this chronologically. I'm not saying this is the most important game of the James Franklin era or anything like that, but the number 1 game, first game, whatever you want to say for me on my list, December 27th, 2014, Penn State against Boston College, playing in the Pinstripe Bowl in Yankee Stadium. Nittany Lions win 31-30. And I put this game down, and Matt, I'm going to start with you here because Matt the Younger was at the time in high school getting ready to come to Penn State, was in a Penn State family, but by this point, this was my first year out of Penn State. I graduated in 2014, so I was there for. Matt wants to talk about a pretty bad season in 2015. You and I both got him beat, but I was there for some pretty rough years in Happy Valley. I know, Matt, you graduated a few years ahead of me. You had been to bowl games before this one. You've been to bowl games since this one. But for me, the reason why this was the first game on my list as I went through the first season of James Franklin football was considering everything that had happened in the years leading up to that, with what happened in 2011, with Coach Paterno's passing, with Bill O'Brien getting hired, and this roster just kind of, they MacGyvered a roster together over the 3 seasons essentially leading up to this. to Hackenberg and Adam Brenneman's recruiting class coming in, to O'Brien leaving for an NFL job 1 year after getting to coach them, to Franklin coming in, having a bit of a rough go of things in that 2014 season, but knowing that bowl ban that got hit, that Penn State got hit with in 2012, got reversed during that. After the second game of the season, Penn State had already been playing football when
That's
they learned
wild to think about.
Yeah, they learned, oh, by the way, you're playing for a bowl game this year. To the fact that it wasn't easy for them to get a bowl game, I have never, in my time as a Penn State fan of the bowl games that I've traveled to since, Matt, experienced an environment as joyous, as, I don't want to say carefree, because it was really important to a lot of people to win that game. But there was just such a sense of appreciation among Penn State fans that they were in this football game. And then the fact that they won it, and won it in the manner they did, with Sam Ficken kind of the poster child for the lowest on-field point that this program had post 2011. Like, just storybook stuff. Like, I'm still getting chills right now as I think about it. So my question kind of to you after that rant is, went to bowl games before, went to bowl games after, been to plenty of games in your life. Have you ever experienced an environment that just kind of joyous as we experienced as Penn State fans in the Bronx that day?
There's two things that I remember, or that come to mind about the game, the Pinstripe Bowl. Is one, I had been to the previous bowl game after the 2011 season, the historic Ticket City Bowl. Which,
oh, wow.
My regrets of going to that game are significant. But I was desperate to get out of town back in the day for a variety of reasons, and I'll be damned if I was going to let the lack of prestige dissuade me from going there. And that was a trip in so many words. But so that's one. It's just kind of the juxtaposition between the atmosphere among Penn State fans in Dallas for that Ticket City Bowl, and then the sense of joy, like you said, Bill, for among the fan base in New York that day. The other thing is, and Bill, you and I were writing for Black Shoe Diaries back then, is this kind of, I think, speaks to that, just joy and appreciation for the experience, was at I'm blanking on the name of the bar, but the pregame
Jake's Dilemma.
Yes, the festivities that we had in Manhattan before heading over to the Bronx, where I don't think you or I or anyone else had much of an idea of how many people to expect, and then we kind of just took over the bar with probably a couple hundred at least, probably more than that when you count people that kind of came and went throughout the morning and early afternoon. But it's among games that I've been to, especially bowl games. It was a very unique and one of a kind type of atmosphere, totally taking the game out of the picture. Just like I said, the appreciation for having the experience once again, to celebrate the program, the team, the university in a positive sense.
Yeah.
And then to win the game the way they did, with the walk-off extra point. And then you think of things like, it was kind of Chris Godwin's breakout. You kind of started to see the seeds of what was starting to be built, even if it was, another rough year was ahead. But you started to see some of the fruits of James Franklin's recruiting, and, in a lot of cases, Bill O'Brien's recruiting as well, planting those young seeds that became the key pieces down the road. That was kind of the day it felt like a lot of that started to, you could see it, and a lot of that's hindsight talking now, of course, too. But
Yeah.
you could see what was starting to be built. If you look closely enough and now you look back on it, you really can see it, I think.
Yeah, Chris Godwin and Deshaun Hamilton in that game combined for 14 catches, 191 receiving yards, and 2 touchdowns. Christian Hackenberg, 34 for 50, 371 yards, 4 touchdowns. And, a thing we remember about Hack was his freshman year, the kid was awesome. And then I remember plenty of times during the 2014 season going, man, I just don't know if this is going to work. I don't know if the Christian Hackenberg, James Franklin marriage is necessary. it feels like one of convenience at this point. And Penn State started that season 4-0, lost 4 in a row, won their next 2 games, Indiana and Temple. That Indiana game, they did everything in their power to not win it. And that got them to bowl eligibility, even though they lost their final 2 games of the year to Illinois and Michigan State. So it was just such an incredible day, such an incredible game. Matt, like we mentioned, you weren't you weren't enrolled at Penn State at the time. What do you remember about that game as someone who, like Penn State, watched it from afar, watched the previous couple of years from afar, but you weren't in Happy Valley every single day in the lead up to that one?
No, I'm the sixth, I want to say, member of my mom's side of the family to go to Penn State, and I was with the 5 others watching this game. And I remember I was waiting for my admissions decision, so like I was like a wreck the whole time. And I just remember how happy just everybody was. Like I don't think I fully understood how much it meant to everybody, like until watching that game. And obviously I grew up around the program. I grew up watching, like 2012 as like a sophomore in high school was my favorite team ever. And the 14 Pinstripe Bowl was like the final send off for a lot of really important pieces to that special team back in 2012. It would have been Jesse James's last game. Oh my God, I had another person named right off the bat who I'm just totally blanking on right now. Somebody give me a hand here. Not the running backs, not the receivers.
Well, we can't read your mind is the big problem here.
No, I know. Mike Hull. It was Mike Hull. That's who I was thinking of. Like for a lot of these big name people and players who made a big impact on that 2012 roster. Zach Zwinnak, that's who I'm thinking of too, although he was hurt, but he still got to go out there and enjoy that whole process. Like, it was just cool to watch these players who I knew were part of Penn State at a very important time. Like, the 13 class and the 14 class don't have a banner in Beaver Stadium. The 2012 class does. Yeah. But that represents the team more than that individual season to me, just with how that is up there in the rafters. So it was just really cool to see a lot of players that I grew up being really big fans of, and it was just really cool to watch it, with my family. And then the admission decision came a couple weeks later, and then it was just a no-brainer.
Yeah, Bill Belton's final game. Mm-hmm. You mentioned Jesse James. I think that might have been Kyle Carter's final game. I don't remember.
He came back in 15, I remember, because, there was something that happened in the student section one time with somebody yelling at Kyle Carter when I was there.
I think that might have been like Naeem Mortman-White. He came back in the subsequent years, but kept getting hurt. So I think that might have been the last time we saw Naeem at the just a lot of guys on that team. CJ Alanian was on that team. I think I can't remember if Jesse Della Valle came back, but a lot of guys who, it's unfortunate they get lost to time a little bit, but they were crucial parts of Penn State staying afloat for the years leading up to that, and the fact that they were, and then of course Sam Ficken. Like you have
Ficken. That's who the other one I wanted to make sure I named was. Yeah, Ficken,
I mean,
hit the game-winning extra point was awesome.
Yeah, I mean the 2012 Virginia game. We'll take a quick tangent, and this will be mostly for Matt and I, since we were in the thick of it at this point, and Matt, you were a sophomore in high school, but like that 2012 Virginia game, I was convinced that Penn State team, maybe they beat Navy, maybe they beat Temple. If they won 4 or 5 games that year, I would have been shocked. And a large part of that was because of Sam Ficken's performance. And for him, Matt, to have gone out the way he did, there's a reason why to this day, when Sam Ficken gets picked up by an NFL team, and when Sam Ficken is out there kicking field goals for an NFL team, all of us Penn State fans are like sitting down on the couch, locked in, rooting for the guy, celebrating him. Just like, what a story that dude was.
No, yeah, I mean, it's you caught me off guard. I was not prepared to talk about 2012 Virginia or Sam Ficken beyond the Pinstripe Bowl, but no, I think it's almost kind of an example or a metaphor for that whole era is Sam Ficken, from the lowest of the lows for a variety of reasons to not necessarily the highest of the highs, but kind of the redemption and the sense that, okay, everything's going to be okay. From a Penn State football standpoint, that, we're going to get through this. Then ultimately we got through this from a health of the program standpoint, I guess.
Yeah. And let's move on to the second game on my list. I don't have anything from 2015 on here. If you were a lifelong fan, the 2015 Penn State team was your favorite team of all time. Like, much love and respect
Tweet
to
at
you.
me. Tweet at me. We'll fight on Twitter.
Sure. You could take it on that. But for me, the second most important and defining game of the James Franklin era has to be October 1st, 2016, Penn State 29, Minnesota 26 in overtime. I'll tell my story of this game in a second, but Matt, we'll start with you on this one.
Yeah.
Were you in the student section? Were you in the box? Like, what do you recall about a game where if you told me at halftime that this was James Franklin's last game as Penn State's head football coach, I would have said thank you.
I was in the student section. This was the year before I got hired by the blog. I remember it was right around maybe like 2.5 weeks after Les Miles got fired at LSU. And my friends were all like, well, when Franklin gets fired, we can just go hire Les Miles and he can be ready to go by the time, like, winter workouts start. Like, I just remember that people were so down bad on James Franklin and on this team. And everybody remembers the Saquon run in overtime. I made sure I brought it up on our last podcast, but Tyler Davis, like the walk-on former soccer kicker, like hits a 40-odd yarder to send the game even into overtime. Like, it was a pretty good like a changing of a passing of the torch from the roster being made up of these scrappy guys who normally wouldn't be able to play at Penn State to tie the game to Saquon Barkley, like one of the best players in Penn State history, period, to win the game. Like, I think that is a pretty good point where you can say this is when the roster started to become an actual big-time roster in the Big Ten. And it was just one of my favorite games. Like, if they would have let us, I would have stormed the field. Like, I thought it was that big a deal. And it's just it's a fun memory to look back on, all these years later, and just think about how far we've come. Like, Minnesota came to town, I think for the first time since 16, just last year. And the game was over by like the third quarter. Like, it's just crazy to see just how quickly things change in this world.
Yeah. If people remember this one correctly, it was so what happened in the lead up to that game? Gross game against Kent State to start the season. They lose a heartbreaker to Pitt, and Mike Gesicki gives this really great speech, really great quote to the media about how, like, there's too much pride, too much fight in this team. We're going to keep fighting for each other. We're not letting this be set, blah, blah, blah. Next week, survive against a not great Temple team 1 year after Temple embarrassed them. Following week, they go to Ann Arbor, get their teeth kicked in by Michigan. And then going into halftime, it was 13-3 Minnesota. And I believe they got booed. I think there might have been some Fire Franklin chants. And then Matt.
There were.
There we go. I've said the story a million times on the blog before. Like, former blog member Pete Burks and I were talking. And I said to Pete, and Pete agreed, we need to get ready. We need to, like, start preparing in the event that Franklin gets fired. We need to maybe pre-write a post, maybe start thinking about, like, who we want, if we do a list of guys we want to hire. And then Matt, I'll let you take it from here, because there's one play that Matt didn't mention in his little spiel there, as I mean, quietly might have been the most important touchdown of the entire season that didn't involve Grant Haley.
Well, yeah, it's the Irvin Charles, I think it's 80 yards if my memory is right.
Yep.
His really the one play he ever made as a Nittany Lion that really kind of reignited the program, in a sense, if you want to get really dramatic about it. But I've told the story before, to go along with you were just saying, Bill. Pete had written "It's time for James Franklin to go" post that was in the editor, that was ready to go, that we were going to hit send on. I don't know if it was going to be that night or the following morning, but it was ready to go. We kept it in there for longer than I care to admit. I remember we made a big deal about it on our Slack at the time when we finally deleted it out of there a year
I saw it
later. The other thing about that game that I'm sure I've mentioned before too is my day job had a situation at the time that had me watching that game on a job site on my iPad, streaming through the Wi-Fi. So I was like a minute and a half or 2 minutes behind, staying off Twitter and Slack and every form of social media that existed back then. And like just like killing myself to not look like, you know, I know what might happen. I know what might happen as we got into overtime and even late in the fourth quarter once Minnesota retook the lead and everything. But it was just there's so many big statements you can make about it, but it really was the beginning of this next era. You know, I think that first half was the end of that 2014 through 2015, early 2016 era of scrappy Penn State, you know, going to fight and claw for everything. They're undermanned to, like Matt said, okay, they've got some guys now. And obviously Saquon is the guy, but, you know, Trace McSorley had the big scramble late. Obviously Irvin Charles, who didn't stick around, but was, I think.
Oh, I forgot about that scramble, Matt, to set up the field goal.
Like
I forgot about that.
Something.
Yeah, that was wild.
But it was
Irvin Charles was a 4-star recruit.
Yeah, and whether not that, you know, he didn't end up being the guy, but he was, like I said, emblematic of this group of guys that came in within a couple of years of each other that became the core of that roster that, you know, won the Big Ten and went to the Rose Bowl and won the Fiesta Bowl and all those things that happened over the next couple of years. That's when it started, was the early third quarter of that game.
Yeah, Irvin Charles in his Penn State career. 3 receptions, 110 yards, 1 touchdown. That play, 1 reception, 80 yards, a touchdown. Like history is just littered with guys who had that one moment, and they can live with that one moment being their moment forever. And this was certainly one of them, and was a spark for Penn State winning the Big Ten, which we'll get to in a second for me. But first, the least surprising answer, I think, on this list: Saturday, October 22nd, Penn State 24, Ohio State number 2. This was Penn State after that Minnesota game, beat up on Maryland, had a bye week, and then Matt, to this day, I mean, you would have been in the stadium for or in attendance for previous Penn State wins over Ohio State. This is the only one that I saw in person. And to this day, I go back and I watch the highlights of that game. That was, for me, the game where any concern that I had from the previous 2 years, any like queasiness in my stomach I still had from those early couple season losses, it went out the window. And I went, no, this is what Penn State football is. Penn State football is a team that can compete, is a program that can compete with, beat, and, you know, find ways to win against the very best teams in college football.
Yeah, and I think what was different about this, compared to the other wins over Ohio State that you mentioned, I was there for the 2001 win when Zach Mills had like 9,000 yards all-purpose in Joe's 324th win to break Bear Bryant's record. I was at the 05 game, which was kind of there are some similarities, I guess, big picture between that 05 game and the 16 game. But I think what was really different about the 16 game from those others was Ohio State was this national power. You know, the 05 team was good, you know, maybe even great. That 2016 team was just littered with NFL talent. You know, they went on to, I think they made the playoff again that year. You know, they still did a lot of big things. They were in that group, and Ohio State obviously still is in that group of the 4 to 6 programs nationally that are the best of the best every year, year in, year out. You just know they're going to be there. And it wasn't pretty, as we can all attest. I remember rewatching this game back in 2020 when during the height of the COVID shutdowns, we did one of our Saturday night rewatches. I remember thinking just how terrible the game was.
Awful.
I think
awful.
I think Trace completed like 9 passes.
8 for 23. 8 for 23, 154, 1 touchdown.
You know, Saquon didn't really do a whole lot, but they did just enough to hang around, and they obviously made the play at the end. And the one thing that sticks out to me, it was one of my favorite things I ever wrote for the blog, and it's one of the handful of things that I wish we had a way to go back and share from time to time, was, and it was inspired by something that Chris Fowler said after the game, that the Valley is happy again. And that it's such a simple term and a simple turn of phrase, but it really, I think, hit the nail on the head. Not that, we were down and depressed and moping, every day, but it was the first time in so long that there was this unbridled joy, people storming the field. I was sitting with Nick, my wife and I. It was actually Jackie's first real home game. She had been to the blue-white game that spring. But that was her first Penn State regular season game. And Nick and Holly, Nick's now wife, were, I think, a row or two in front of us. And it wasn't, after Haley scores, we're all going nuts. And Nick and I are just kind of like grabbing each other and like, oh my God, this is happening kind of thing. And it ends and we just hug. And it was just, the most pure form of joy that I had at a sports event, let alone a Penn State event, in so long. And it really, not to get too dramatic and big picture here, but it's the kind of game that that's why we watch sports, why we care so much, is because of the power that it can do and that it can have over, in that case, 100-some thousand people in the stadium that night, and how many others watching and in parking lots and everything like that. It's just kind of one of those surreal moments that, you hope you get a few of them in your life, with your team. And that was one of them for us.
Yeah. And I'm looking back on it right now. Ohio State was up 21-7 at the end of the third quarter, 21-7, Trace touchdown early in the fourth quarter, Tyler Davis field goal, kind of midway through the fourth quarter, make it 24-17. And of course, Grant Haley, it's blocked. If you guys remember correctly, this was, Matt, how much money did we make off of the shirt that was just printing the Urban Meyer quote? I wish they saved the whiteout for other games.
I don't know how much money, but we sold, I think it was 150, 200 of them. I have a spreadsheet somewhere in the archive that shows how many of each shirt we sold. When we shut the store down, I wanted to kind of see what the grand total. It wasn't our number one bestseller. I want to say it was the one we printed after the Big Ten championship game that year. And then the Tutty shirts,
it's that or Penn State. Penn State was also way up there. Neither here nor there. We're getting too far off guard. It sold a lot, but Matt, you were in the student section for that one, correct?
I was.
So I was. Yeah. All three of us were in the stadium. I was the complete opposite side, upper deck for that one. Matt was in his seats on the east side of the stadium. You're in the student section. As someone who is in the student section, just what do you remember about that day? What stuck out about that? What stuck out about the lead up to the game? Do you remember there being a feeling of they can do that? When did it become real to you as someone sitting in the student section, whether it was in the week leading up to it, while you were tailgating before the game, while you were watching the game, that Penn State was going to win this football game?
I thought they were going to lose. Honestly, I never left a game early my entire time in college, but I remember when the punt on the the snap on the Blake Gillikin punt attempt sails over Gillikin's head and he falls in the end zone. And then I think it's 21-7. And I'm like, nobody ever, recovers from that against Ohio State. Like, this is just going to make me mad now. Like, I thought we had all this momentum. And I turned to my girlfriend and I'm like, look, we got to go. And she goes, no, like, let's wait it out. So we waited it out. Lo and behold, I get to storm the field later that night. And it was, I'll never forget it. Like, I remember my girlfriend lived in Nittany Apartments at the time, which is right by the stadium. And I remember I left, and this was before I was on the beat. So I had never really spoken to any of the coaches before. And I'm walking, and Terry Smith is walking back that way to drop a recruit off, I think at his host's house, because that's where the athletes live back there. And I knew who Terry Smith was. I just said, Coach, great game. This is such a fun night. And he goes, I'm just so happy this town has something to cheer about. And I'm like, wow, what a nice guy. And I'm thrilled Terry's still here. But I'll never forget that interaction with Terry, where it was away from the stadium. It couldn't have been longer than an hour and a half after the game had ended. And just to see him out there, just talking to the recruit about what this could, I don't remember who the recruit was. I'm sorry. I wish I did. But that was just one of my favorite nights of college, and one I'll never forget. Also, the whiteout the year before was noon against Michigan, so it was my first actually cool whiteout.
Yeah, and the two things I remember from that game, they were on either side of the block kick. One was, if I remember correctly, on the drive where the block kick happened. If I remember correctly, or maybe it was on like I can't remember exactly which one it was. JT Barrett throws a bomb down the field, and John Reed puts his hands out like it hits John Reed in stride, like on Penn State's 4-yard line. And instead of John Reed catching it, it's one of the few times like it was like he was fielding a punt and he just dropped it. And if I remember correctly, that was on the drive where it was earlier in the drive on when the kickoff up. But it was just one of those moments where I went, Penn State couldn't get the break there. It's over. And then I remember after that, after the kick is blocked, Haley returns it. That next drive for Ohio State ended up being their final drive of the game. It just, every single person on that Penn State team, it seemed like they got plus 10 skill attributes across the board. Like
Evan Schwan was unblockable.
They could have gone into the stands and grabbed any 11 fans, put them in pads and put them on the field. There was nothing Ohio State was going to do. There was even that like egregious, I think, was it Jordan Luckett? No, not Jordan.
Jordan Smith, the missed
Smith.
PI.
Yeah.
Miss PI that LeBron James tweeted about. It was that bad of a call, and it was a break Penn State guy. And like, I just remember Evan Schwan, Kevin Givens get that final set. I'm just running and hugging everyone I can. It was the happiest that I had been to that point as a Penn State fan until a couple of weeks later, the next game on my list, Saturday, December 3rd in Indianapolis. Penn State 38, Wisconsin 31. Matt, Penn State wins the Big Ten for the first and only time under James Franklin. And you just black out, man. Like, you black out everything else. That game was the only thing in the world that mattered. And the biggest thing that I remember about that game, Matt, Penn State looked awful in the first half of that football game. They were down 28-7. 40-yard touchdown pass, Trace McSorley to Saeed Blacknall, 28-14. I wasn't sitting with you, Matt. I was sitting with a couple of our friends, other folks that we know, other Penn State fans. Not a single person in that stadium thought Penn State was going to lose that football game, even though they were down 28-14.
Talking to me or him, Matt?
Him. This is an even one. We went over this before the game.
The even is Flip.
Oh, yeah.
The even is me, but you teed up him, so I wasn't sure.
Yeah, whatever. Why don't you talk? I don't care.
We're very organized.
Yeah, Matt, go ahead.
I thought I had a minute here. No, it was. And I remember two things. I think I have two things for every one of these. One, I think it was on maybe the play where Trace fumbled the snap, or it was the bad snap, or they went for it on fourth down around midfield on like a 4th and 4-ish kind of play and didn't get it. And I was sitting in the last row at Lucas Oil, and behind us is like this metal grate, and I smacked it with my hand. I swear to God, I thought I broke my hand. My wife thought I broke my hand. The friends we were with thought I broke my hand. I did not break my hand. So that always sticks with me. And I remember looking around halftime at Twitter and just kind of scrolling through and, seeing what people had said. And the Michigan fans and some of the Ohio State beat writers and, why is Penn State in this game? They're only here because of the fluke block kick. And no one was really saying anything. They were just kind of getting they're firing off the takes as people do. And it was, I don't know if it was the first play of the second half. It was early in the second half. It was the second touchdown to, I believe, Blacknall on the post play where he catching
one play 70 yards. We got a ball game in Naptown.
Yep. God, I don't remember any of that stuff either. I'm getting old. But it was that moment where like they're going to win this. I don't know how they're going to win this, but they're winning this game. So they'd gotten a couple stops at the end of the second half or the end of the first half. They got the late touchdown, and then they score early in the second half, and it's on. You just know it's on. But they outscore them what? I can't remember what it was, something to 3 in the second half, and it was just complete domination. And I remember in that last drive for Wisconsin before they stopped on the 4th down deep in their own end, that there was going to be a play made somewhere. And part of that was you knew Wisconsin didn't have the explosive offense that was going to, hit the big play to retake the lead quickly. You just had that feeling like we had for 2 months or 3 months at that point. Someone's just going to make the play to win the game at some point, and sure enough, they do.
Yeah. Matt, where did you watch this game?
I watched this game. I was living on the 7th floor of Beaver Hill at the time, and my sister, who was in college at the same time as me, she had a friend on the 5th floor. So I went down. I watched it on the 5th floor of Beaver Hill.
And what happened after? Because Matt and I experienced Indianapolis. What happened as someone who was a Penn State student at the time? What was it like in Happy? Were you guys storming Beaver Canyon? Like what was just happening in town during and after that football game?
I remember I got out on the balcony of the apartment I was at, and I was like yelling across the parking lot. If anyone lived in Beaver Hill, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The parking lot that faces, oh my God, whatever the other main street is in State College that goes the opposite way of the way coming in. I've been gone for too long. I don't remember. Yeah, thank you. And I was yelling to my roommates, and they came out, and then slowly but surely, a lot of other people started coming out on their balconies. And I had never seen like the Beaver Canyon like rush before, and then I just saw the canyon start to flood with people. And of course I went down and I joined in, and it was just a really cool moment to watch everybody kind of collectively celebrate and lose their mind. And one thing I will never forget about that, and in that moment was so unique. At that time, the college football playoff was in its 3rd year, and there had never been a conference champion with 2 losses. So there was this hope that, like, are we going to get in the playoff now? Like, I vividly remember, like, sitting there the next morning being like, I think we're going to get in. Like, they're going to let the conference champion in. Like, we just beat another top 10 team in Wisconsin. And then, of course, we didn't. The 2-loss precedent's been set because of that. But I remember in that, like, very specific moment, people had no idea what was about to happen. They really believed we could have been tapped for the playoff. And, you can argue if they should have or not. That's a whole other podcast. But just in that moment, it was like pure elation and just excitement. Like that whole season felt like it was on house money. And to go out like that was just one of the cooler moments, I think, of the past 9 years.
Yeah, and like part of the reason I have it on here for why it was so important, why it was so defining, obviously because for the really great reason, the really joyous reason of only time Penn State's won the Big Ten under James Franklin, but then the really unfortunate and really gutting reason of Penn State becomes the first conference champion, first Big Ten champion to be left out of the playoff. And Penn State so far, best opportunity to be one of the teams in the field, got lost in that situation. And, I think it's very easy for people to dwell on that as like Penn State's best chance. They kind of had it taken away from them, kind of didn't take advantage of it early in the season, blah, 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 blah. But I think you ask 95% of Penn State fans, and they say the joy that they felt in that moment. And seeing James Franklin hold up the Big Ten championship trophy before James Harbaugh did it. Like, it's just something that I will never forget. I don't think any Penn State fan will ever forget. And speaking of unforgettable things, game number 5 on my
Matt,
list.
real quick, I'm taking this one, so you don't have to go 3 in a row. I'll take this one, then we'll readjust after the ad read.
Perfect. 2017, a season that was we'll get to that in a second. September 23rd, Penn State 21, Iowa 19.
Oh God.
There are 2 things for Matt in this game for me. Number 1, for as long as I live, I never want to feel what I felt during that football game again. Just the dread, because this was a game that happened in a season where we all thought Penn State very well could have won a national championship, very well could have made the playoff, all that. And it seemed like, it seemed like they were going to lose that in Kinnick Stadium that night. And then the other thing, the thing that I will always remember, the thing that makes this game so important for, I think, a lot of Penn State fans, Saquon Barkley flips his commitment from Penn State to Rutgers. Saquon Barkley stays committed to Penn State after Bill O'Brien leaves because he believes in James Franklin. And we saw what the best version of the best player who has ever played under James Franklin was capable to do at the height of his powers.
Real quick, Saquon committed to James.
He visited. You know what? He visited during the Michigan 4 overtime game. And we'll talk about that off the pod. All right, go ahead, Matt.
I'm not proud of my behavior at this game. In hindsight, I am really not proud of my behavior. We were on a canning weekend. It was when canning was still allowed for Thon, and we watched it at my friend's house with her family, and I was like a wreck, and everyone was like being really cool. And in my head, I'm like freaking out. I'm like pacing. I'm screaming in like a stranger's living room. In hindsight, pretty embarrassing. But hey, they won the game. I just remember, feeling dread. I remember this is where I was like, okay, like, this is how this season ends. You can't take a loss the rest of the year. Like this team isn't built to go undefeated, blah, blah, blah. And then I think this is where the legend of Saquon Barkley really became permanent. Like, I think he would have been remembered as like an all-time great, even after, because of like the Rose Bowl run and everything like that. I think this is going to have him remembered like as the best running back, at least in my opinion, to play at Penn State. Like, he almost has the rushing record despite only playing here for 3 years. Like, it's wild everything he was able to do.
Yeah, it's the list of the greatest players in Penn State history. It's like him, LeVar Arrington, John Capoletti, Jack. Like, it's not the guys he is mentioned with are Hall of Fame level guys.
Yeah. And I just remember the next day, I just scrolled Twitter to read like people's takes. It was when people were so mad about it. Like, everyone was still thought Penn State was frauds. Like, I remember I wrote I think either myself or Tom wrote a Mess Boards post about it. Like, it was just a phenomenal day of content the next day. And one of the best, I think, wins of the Franklin area. It was really cool to watch a lot of really talented people make some big plays.
Yeah, I'm never going to forget. Josie Jewell won Big Ten Defensive Player of the Week that week, basically because he kept Saquon from getting 15 yards every time he touched the ball, and instead he got 8-9 yards every time he touched the ball. Like, that's how good Saquon was. So good that a guy who only limited him to a first down every time he touched the ball was named the best defensive player the conference had that week. Matt, you and I would have been watching this from couches somewhere. What do you remember about this one? Were you there?
No, I was not. You'll remember this when I start telling the story, but I was in Baton Rouge with my brother for the LSU Syracuse game. My brother's a Syracuse alum, and we had planned a whole weekend around it. The only live part of the game I saw was Iowa's drive to go ahead. This is all on the walk back from Tiger Stadium to where we had parked, because we had stayed in New Orleans, and so we were walking back to the car to drive back to New Orleans. It's like midnight or whatever, 11 o'clock, I guess, because we're in Central Time. And I've been following the game on my phone and everything, and knew it was close, knew it was kind of one of those typical Kinnick games where you never get the knockout blow that it seems like is inevitable. And so what would have been Akram Wadley, who scored the go-ahead touchdown on kind of I think it was a screen pass where he had the long catch and run. And
that's a name I forgot. He was a good player.
He was awesome. It was Wadley.
Awesome, yeah. And we're, I don't know, halfway between the stadium and our car at this point, and he scores. And I say some words that I can't say on here. I throw my hat down. My brother looks at me like, what the hell's wrong with you? The various LSU fans around us are looking like, what the hell is wrong with this guy? And, we get back to the car, and I don't think the drive had started yet, between the commercials and all the delay between the go-ahead score. And we decided we're going to sit in the car and watch the end of the game on whoever's phone we were watching on. And I think it's when they converted the fourth down, the only fourth down other than at the very end that they faced the whole drive, where I think it was Blacknall that had
it was
little 8-yard slant or whatever it was over the middle. Like, they might actually do this. And then I don't remember the order any of this happened, so bear with me if anything that didn't happen in the order I say it did. But the Godwin catch where Trace scrambles and hits him down the sideline, the Saquon play where it looks like they've got him dead to rights 5 yards deep in the backfield, and somehow turns it into like a 15-yard gain and a first down, and then ultimately the Johnson touchdown at the end, everything that happens from there with the shushing and Trace's celebration on the 2-point conversion just to end the game. And we're still sitting in the parking lot, mind you. Traffic has cleared somewhat. I think, it just was kind of like this surreal moment. And it was like this moment of silence in the car between my brother and I. The phone's turned off at this point because the game's over. And we don't really say anything for a while. And then we start talking about, Baton Rouge was really cool and it was fun. I would love to go back for a big game. We're almost back to New Orleans that night. And if anyone's ever made the drive from Baton Rouge to New Orleans, you cross over the marshes and the Delta. And you've got this big, long bridge where you're just over the marsh for 20 miles or something. And we're back on the other side of the bridge. And my brother goes, so if he didn't catch that pass at the end, we're driving off that bridge, right? and I kind of laughed for a second. Who knows? I wasn't driving off the bridge, mind you, but it was one of those, like, kind of in a sense like the Ohio State game where you hope you get a couple moments like that in your lifetime as a fan, where you experience that complete 180 of emotions from utter despair to complete jubilation in the course of like 10 minutes, however long that drive took. And I remember I barely slept that night. I'm sitting on my phone in our hotel room, scrolling through, catching up on everything that happened that night. And I remember saying something that following week to whoever, that it really felt like after that game that Penn State, this is a special year. This is going to be one of those special years. And we all know what happened from there on out. But it was in that moment, it felt like every team that does something significant has a game like that, right? Has a moment like that where it feels like this is all going to slip away. And it felt like this was Penn State's. They got through it in a place where plenty of dreams have gone to die, including Penn State's, in that case, 9 years earlier. And yeah, I've loved this exercise of kind of going back through these. I didn't, 4 of the 5 games that we've talked about were actually on my list, not to spoil anything. And I'm thinking of things that as I was going through and creating my list that I hadn't even thought of, where I was, what I was doing, what I felt, who I was with. This has kind of been a fun trip down memory lane so far.
Yeah, I watched this game. I was watching at my dad's place, and he went to bed in like the fourth quarter because he's in his 60s, and when you're in your 60s, you fall asleep easily. And he goes to bed. Penn State, I think he went to bed after Iowa. Yeah, after the 70-yard Wadley touchdown to make it 15-13. And he rolled over at some point. He saw Iowa's second touchdown to go up 19-15. He just turns the TV off because I had gone somewhere else. And he wakes up the next morning. I will never forget this. He wakes up the next morning and goes, so that was a tough loss, was it? I was like, what? He goes, yeah, did Penn State win that game? I went, yeah, did you not hear me screaming? And he looked at me dead in the eyes with the look that only a father can give a son and said, I thought you were mad, and that's why you were screaming. And no, it was outside of the fact that Penn State was apparently a 12.5-point favorite. And for some godforsaken reason, Las Vegas thought Penn State was a 12.5-point favorite, and Vegas thought the over-under in that game was 53. It's nice to know that Las Vegas had never watched a Penn State Iowa game before this. But it was just an unbelievable game. The performance by Saquon, as long as I live, I'm never seeing a Penn State player do that. I've seen Penn State players do incredible things. I've never seen a Penn State player just decide that on a day when nobody else has it, that Penn State's not losing this football game. And just as good of a performance as I'm ever going to see. But like Matt said, things didn't quite go Penn State's way the rest of the season. And we have made an executive decision while we were yammering here, folks. We're going to cut this into a 2-part podcast. So we did 5 games, the first 5 games, first 5 important games of the James Franklin era. We're cutting it here. We're going to do the second half. Keep an eye out on your podcast feeds, on YouTube, whatever, for that. we're going to take care of a little bit of billing right here by making sure that our friends at Home Field Apparel don't get mad at us for this decision that we made. Matt, you just DM me in Slack. Yes, Matt, we're doing the Home Field read here.
I got you.
Listen, we like getting paid, and we get paid by our friends at Home Field Apparel. If you're a collegiate sports fan of the internet, you are surely aware of Home Field Apparel. If you are not, a premium collegiate apparel brand based out of Indianapolis. I am currently wearing Home Field gear, my Penn State 1986 national championship shirt. Either of you guys wearing Home Field gear right now?
You know it. I'm rocking my Penn State old Lion Shrine logo shirt.
All my home field shirts are dirty, and I have a 2-month-old daughter and don't have time to do laundry.
Yeah, I wore a Home Field shirt for each of the last 2 days, and I just took it off and replaced it with another Home Field shirt. They are comfortable, they're unique in the designs. They take the time to make sure you feel a little bit closer to your school, make you a little more curious about your school, other schools, make you want to go out there, learn a bit more about the world of college athletics. So much really cool stuff out there, including new pieces of gear in their Penn State line on top of the 15 pieces of apparel that they already had in their Penn State line. There are t-shirts, there are crew necks, there's a quarter zip, there are joggers. There's so much good stuff for Penn State or for a school other than Penn State. If you want to, I know there are plenty of Penn State folks out there who have family. We went to a place like Slippery Rock. They have a really great line of Slippery Rock gear. They have gear for so many different schools. Head over there, check out what Home Field Apparel has. And if you are a new customer, you use the promo code roarlionsroar, one word, all uppercase, to get 15% off of your first order. Again, if you are a new customer, use the promo code roarlionsroar, one word, all uppercase, for 50% off of your first order. Thank you, as always, to Home Field Apparel for sponsoring the podcast. And for now, that's it for the podcast. We are, again, cutting this fun little game, exercise, whatever you want to call it, into 2 parts.
We should have known Remember Some Dudes would take 2 hours. We really should have.
Yeah, we're 56 right now. Keep an eye out for part 2 of this, which will be coming, and I would say is going to be a little less optimistic in the coming days. But for now, thank you as always for listening to Roar Lions Roar. Make sure you subscribe wherever you go and get your podcast. If you could leave us a 5-star review, please go and leave us a 5-star review. If you are over on the YouTubes, give us a subscribe over there, like our page, hop into the comments, talk with Penn State fans about just general Penn State things. Make sure you are following us over on Twitter at RLR Blog. And one last time, thank you very much to Home Field Apparel.
Wow, no love for Threads, Bill.
No love for Threads. Thank you again to Home Field Apparel for sponsoring the podcast. Again, promo code roarlionsroar, one word, all uppercase, for 15% off of your first order if you are a new customer. One last time, thank you very much for listening to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. For Matt DeBear, for Matt Filipovitz, I'm Bill DeFilippo. Take care, everyone.
Go State.